Well, welcome to Everyday Torah. My name is Trevor. Here with Jacob. Most of you know Jacob plenty by now. If you're brand new here, the entire channel is dedicated to uh, teaching believers mostly. You know, if anyone is not a believer and they come on the channel, they're certainly welcome here. But our desire is to teach people how to walk in the commandments of our God, the Torah. And that's a foreign concept for a lot of people, but the more you dive into it, and I've been living it for a while, Jacob, you've been living it for a while,
Yeah,
and it is not difficult. It's different, but it's not
it's
difficult.
different.
And it definitely helps us theologize better. And it's just, I think it's good. And it sets well in our heart because to walk in righteousness in that way is something, Jacob, that I think has benefited both of us and our families, and it's good and right.
And that's what let's get the basics. So the basics for today is a continuation of John and this idea that, okay, we've established in the previous podcast, Yeshua is making it really clear for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear and minds that are able to receive that he is the God of Israel. He is the angel of the Lord. He is the I am. This is what we set forth last podcast. So
And we're
now
talking John 8 here, correct?
yeah, John 8, yeah.
Okay.
So now what we're going to do, this is part two. So the first one was, who are you? Who are
Mhm.
you, Yeshua? But by inference, whose are you? Do you belong to God or do you belong to the devil? There's these two households. Um, Augustine, I don't agree with obviously everything Augustine said, but Augustine couched it in terms of like these two cities, right? So you have the city of God as opposed to the world. And so maybe that's kind of what we're getting at, but it's not going to stop there. This is a household, right? This is family matters. So this part is part two, if the Son sets you free. So John 8:31. If we were to go there, it says again, or a little bit of backtracking. So Yeshua said to the Jews who had believed in him. So we've got a specific audience here. If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. And we established what that meant if Yeshua is the I am. If he is the God of Israel, then his word is everything to the left of Matthew too, from Genesis, right? So
Mhm.
it expands what the truth is, because he says, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, Psalm 119, forgetting the verse, says, your word is truth. So the sum total of his word is the truth. And he says the truth will set you free, and that this is playing, James will play off of this, the law of liberty, the law of freedom. When you look into that and truly understand, you realize that you're free. So what happens in verse 33, John 8? They answered him, we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? So we're gonna work with this. And Trevor, if at any point my internet starts to get a little bit weird, just let me know and I'll pause, and
Yeah.
feel free to interject so that I'm not getting some stuff dropped here. Um, so what's being said here? The Jews say, and this is not pejorative, it's just this is who he was talking to, right? It's not the Jews, it's just the Jews. The Jews were listening to him, right?
Mhm.
So they say, we've never been slaves. And everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin, is what Yeshua goes on to say, verse 34. Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. So what's the accusation or the observation, if you will? Because he's not an accuser. In fact, he goes on and says in other places, your accuser is Moses, on whom you have set your hope. He's like, I'm not accusing you. Moses is the one who accuses you.
Yeah, but he is pointing out that they have fallen short according to some standard.
Correct. So they say we aren't slaves, and he gets to the deeper thing. This is Yeshua. He just cuts, I don't know, he cuts to the chase. right? Cuts to the quick. Everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. So this is what they know. What he just said here is that they are slaves to sin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he just said. But then he says something curious. The slave does not remain in the house forever. Why are we talking about houses all of a sudden? The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are offspring of Abraham, of Avraham, yet you seek to kill me. So there's the sin, because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. So what's going on?
Well, yeah, because everyone's going to be asking, if they're just brand new to the channel, they're going to ask, well, isn't what Jesus did was set us free from the what the Torah was telling us was sin? So he set us free from that. If we're no longer in bondage to the infraction that is it pointed out to us, impugned on us because of what the Torah tells us.
The righteous requirement of the law.
Yeah, aren't we free from that?
Well, and this is what we went back to last week, is that if you abide in his word, you're his disciples. And Yeshua says here that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You see, what the word of God actually does, contrary to how it has been taught, the law sets you free from slavery. The law shows you how to be free from being a slave to sin.
Yeah, so it's not freedom from the Torah, it's freedom from the sin itself, from sin, from the law of sin. And Paul goes over this, yes,
with
in
Romans expansively. And if you
Okay.
haven't watched Traver's series on Romans, really important series. He's still working on it. Just did a plug on Romans chapter 8. He's going to keep going. So be getting your daily bread, right? I know everybody can't do these 1 hour podcasts, but these, you can think of these as your Shabbat feasts, if you will.
Yeah.
And but you need to be having that daily bread. So if you need some daily bread, go get one of those 10-15 minute snippets, and that's your daily bread. Get your mind thinking. So what's going on here? Who are they? They're slaves to sin. Well, okay. And then all of a sudden this house thing, like, what's he talking about? Well, he's applying Torah, Traver. You ready for the crazy Jacob? Just
I am, but tell me what verse I'm on so that way I can really grab it.
Leviticus 25, verse 39.
Okay, going there.
This blew my mind last night.
Okay. Leviticus 25, verse what?
39. Oh, we're going to be looking at 39 to 55. And I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you kidding me, Leviticus? Yes, Leviticus.
Okay.
It's important.
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay.
So a little bit of background here, okay? There are two types of slaves that were in ancient Israel. Okay, I'm speaking in large brushstrokes here. Okay, so verse 39, if your brother becomes poor beside you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a slave. He shall be with you as a hired worker and as a sojourner. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. Then he shall go out from you, he and his children with him, and go back to his own clan and return to the possession of his fathers. For they are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him ruthlessly, but shall fear your God. Now here's the part that applies this whole thing. As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from amongst the nations. Okay, so we've got two groups here, two types of slaves, fellow Hebrews that had become indebted, and they either work until their debt was paid, which if you were to go down to verse 47 to 49, Okay, they would have to pay off their debt, and they could do that through a form of indentured servitude. That's the thing. You can't think transatlantic slave trade when you think of slavery in the ancient world. It by and large in Israel, it was never, it did not work like that. It was
Mhm.
they didn't have credit, right? So if you go into debt, you don't have a credit card. You just swipe your American
Right.
Express to the ancient world, Shekel Express or something, and defer the debt. You got to pay the debt. So what they would do is they would sell themselves to the one they were indebted to work off the debt. That's just the way it worked back then.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do to pay off the debt. You can't just not have the debt. So that's one option, is the Hebrew option. Okay. The others were foreigners, and these could be retained in the family. So if we look at the verse that I looked at and went, wait a minute, this is really interesting. It's the verse 46. I'll start in 45. Leviticus 25:45. You may also buy from amongst the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. This is the critical verse. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may, so this is the key thing, you may bequeath them to your sons. You may make slaves of them, of the foreigner, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. So what on earth did I just bring that passage up for? And by the way, the section closes with, they are my slaves whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So the section closes by saying that the Israelites legally belong to Yahweh because he purchased them from Egypt, from Pharaoh. And this is not an accident, because this is exactly how the Ten Commandments open. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He's got a claim to them because he legally purchased them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but isn't it curious how verse 46 is worded? It says, you may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. What does Yeshua say? He says, the slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed.
Yeah.
Boom.
Oh my gosh. Look, Jacob, I've been studying the Torah for a while, and there's a lot of sections I've figured out, and I have not figured that one out. And yeah, we got the kind of you had to land that on me in a podcast right now, because hey, if you're listening, I've never heard that before. I've not heard yeah, I'm speechless. Yeah, that's a connection that I have never ever seen.
So what just
Wait,
happened?
how did you find this? This
I
is what I
just,
need to know. How did you connect those two dots?
because I knew in my head, because I read my Torah, and I knew there's two types of slaves. There's the slaves that are brethren, and there are the foreigners. The Hebrew slaves can't remain in the house forever, but the foreign slave could. And so the Redeemer has an obligation to set his brethren free at the year of Jubilee. He has to, but he doesn't have to release the foreigner. But the Torah is worded in such a way that it says he may bequeath them as a possession forever. You do not have to retain the slaves in the house. The son gets to make that call.
You're blowing me up this morning.
Okay. So
Man.
this is what's going on. Yeshua has just said he's the one who has the authority to set slaves free in the Father's house. That's what he's just said.
And what
He's
verse is
all
that?
um if the son sets you free, you're free indeed, verse
Yeah.
36.
Okay.
So I'm
36.
okay. So Yeshua's just said he's the one that has the authority to set slaves free in the Father's house. He's also just said that the Jews listening to him are actually slaves of sin. And because of that, they aren't even a part of the Father's house anymore because they're the children of the devil. They
Do
are
you think that
slaves to sin.
the Jewish I'm just going to go with men because it's probably a group of men listening to Jesus right at that moment. Do you think they're connecting this back to Leviticus 25? Is there any indication in the text?
I'm just going to work through it. I I think this went right over their heads because their
Oh,
response is we're not enslaved to anybody, or they're
yeah.
right. They don't get it. They
Holy
they don't
moly.
they don't get it. They really don't. And Yeshua is trying to explain it to them. He says, no, you are, but you don't get it. So because they're in sin, they're slaves of sin. And due to that fact, they are no longer a part of the Father's house. They're physical descendants of Abraham, but they've sold themselves into sin. They've sold themselves to a foreigner to pay off a debt. So the scenario, and we're going to get to this because there's another Torah law that discusses this too.
And we're going to get to today.
Yes.
Okay. I'm
So
shutting up.
the scenario though that's now played out is that Yeshua, an Israelite, has brothers, the Jews, who are enslaved to a foreigner. This is exactly the scenario we're given in Leviticus 25, 47 to 49. You're given a Torah scenario where this plays out.
Okay.
So 47 to 49, 25, Leviticus 25, 47. If a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich, and your brother beside him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you, or to a member of the stranger's clan, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his cousin may redeem him, or a close relative from his clan may redeem him.
Okay.
So what's the requirement? One of their brothers has the right to pay for the redemption. Yeshua is telling them they're enslaved and that they need to be set free. And they don't know it. And he's setting himself up as the Redeemer. By Torah law, they must be redeemed from the foreign power of Satan by a kinsman redeemer. The Torah commands it. He has to. This is exactly what the writer of Hebrews is trying to get at in Hebrews 2, 5 to 18. So if you go to Hebrews 2, 5 to 18, we go there. So Hebrews 2, 5 to 18.
I'm there.
So I'm going to just read here and just let this wash over you for a second. For it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we are speaking. It has been testified somewhere, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Now, in putting everything in subjection to him, he has left nothing outside of his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we can see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Yeshua, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was befitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the assembly, I will sing your praise. That's from Psalm 22. If you haven't read Psalm 22, go read it. Because Psalm 22 is this interaction where you have this suffering person. And then after they've suffered, they said, you have saved me. And it's the son talking to the father. And so what does the son do in response to this salvation of the dad delivering him, of the father delivering him? I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the assembly. And again, verse 13, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those through who fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. So what is going on? The point of emphasis is verse 14 to 18. He has the power to deliver his brothers from the foreign oppressor, the devil. Despite the fact that they want to murder him, he willingly lays down his life for his brothers as the redemption price to snatch them from a life of slavery to the devil. And because they are his brothers, this is the law of the kinsman redeemer. He has the legal right, according to his father's Torah, to redeem his brothers. Dad gave him that right in the Torah. So he can legally purchase his descendants, the children of Abraham, back from the devil. Is that not nuts?
Bro, I'm beside myself. I'm beside myself. I'm still beside myself that you went through that first hour that no one ever even heard, and you knew you were going to pop me with this. Yeah. I don't even know what to say. I was wise enough, at least last time we were together. I said, hey, you are a fool if you're trying to understand the New Testament without understanding the Old Testament. At least I know that. I don't know that part. But now that I see it, yeah, what's I think part of what is boggling my little nugget here is how much more of what Jesus says in the New Testament, in the Gospels, is all rooted in that Torah in ways that
Everything.
I had never.
I know, it's everything. It is saturated. All he's doing is living the Torah. He's living it.
Ooh.
Every day he is living the Torah because he's the embodiment of the Torah. This is what's even more incredible is Satan tries to do this whole thing, enslaves the children of Abraham, but Satan is so blinded by the might makes right principle that he never, nor did the principalities and powers see, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians, that if they had known the plan of God, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They are so obsessed with the might make right, do it by force. The Torah is built so that the meek can be delivered. And so what they don't get is that the Son, the plan of God, of the Father and the Son, is that the Son is going to be made like these brethren so that he can redeem them. That's the legal requirement of the law. It has to be a kinsman redeemer. Somebody else can't purchase them. It has to be, and the first one in the list is brother. It's not cousin or father or anything. The first word in the list is the brother has the right to redeem.
Now, so if I'm going back to John 8, verse 35, I mean, I'm going to put my, part of it is, there's a takeaway for me here too, for us. And a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. So if what you're conjecturing right now is that this is kind of like I've come for the, Paul will talk about, you come first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. Is the ordering here like Jesus is talking to them? I've come for you.
I've come for the lost sheep of Israel.
And I'm in that too, though, somehow. So
wait for it.
Okay, I'm waiting.
So you wait for it, because
Okay.
this is the culmination that we'll get to. So you identify it correctly, but it's by another law that you were brought in. And I already read it in Leviticus.
Yeah. Oh, I'm tracking.
So you have the children of natural descent and not natural descent. There's two laws, right? So here's the thing. Hebrews, we covered that. So what's the so what? Okay, what's the so what of this whole thing that I just presented? What on earth does this have to do with the way of the wanderer, Jacob? Go ahead and turn to Hebrews chapter 3, verse 1.
I'm there.
Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Yeshua, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moshe was faithful in all God's house. For Jesus, Yeshua, has been counted worthy of more glory than Moshe, as much more glory as a builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moshe was faithful in all God's house as a slave, to testify to the things that were to be spoken about. Okay, and it actually, the word there is not dwolos, it's therapon. So I'll correct that Moshe was faithful in all God's house as a servant, to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ, Messiah, is faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house. It's actually written in such a way that it should be translated, my opinion. We are in, it's esmen hos oikos. We are to be somewhere. We're in his house. If indeed we hold fast our confidence, there's the condition. We are in his house if indeed we hold fast our confidence and are boasting in our hope. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion on the day of testing in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore, I was provoked with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brethren, lest any of you have an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Messiah, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end. As it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt, led by Moses, and with whom, as he provoked for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. So what just happened? The so what is that the writer of Hebrews has deliberately injected Yeshua as the voice that you do not want to disobey now, and he was the voice that you did not want to disobey then. And he's pulling from Psalm 95. So as we've established in the previous video that son Yeshua was the one who from Genesis has been revealing himself, writer of Hebrews completely jives with this. Quote Psalm 95. Now, this needs to be read in its actual Psalm 95. You can't just read this and then fully understand what the writer of Hebrews is actually saying. So if you go to Psalm 95 and start in actual verse 7, the writer of Hebrews starts mid-stanza. Verse 7 starts with this: for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. What does Yeshua say in John? I am the good shepherd. My sheep know me. The writer of Hebrews is making sure you know who you're dealing with. You're dealing with God. That's who Yeshua is. You are dealing with Yahweh. And if you disobey him, you will not navigate the wilderness. This is the way of the wanderer. If you want to not wander in vain through the wilderness of this life, you need to hear this. Because if you don't understand this, you will wander in vain. If you disobey his voice, you're going to die in the wilderness without ever receiving the inheritance, even though he delivered you from Egypt. Why? Paul tells you why in 1 Corinthians 4:1. So if you go to 1 Corinthians 4:1, 1 Corinthians 4. This is how one should regard us: as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. That word stewards is from the root word oikos, so it's oikonomos, where we get our word economics. Paul says, you want to know how you should regard us? Servants and household stewards. Verse 2, moreover, it is required of household stewards that they be found faithful. And Paul also tells you in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. I'm sorry, not verse 2, verse 5. An athlete is not crowned unless he completes according to the rules.
Okay.
That word there is nomimos. Comes from nomos. So Paul flat out tells you if you don't run the race according to the law, you don't get a crown.
Okay. I got to ask what everyone's asking. It seems that you are saying that if we are a wanderer in this time, we are in this wilderness, if we are not found to be faithful, faithful being further understood as being obediently faithful, being obedient to the Torah, we are not going into the promised land. Please clarify.
So Yeshua is our Passover lamb, right? Everybody's in agreement on that.
Yeah.
So what's the imagery being given? You can believe in Yeshua and be delivered out of Egypt and still fail and not receive the inheritance. So for the people who want to say you can just believe in Yeshua and it's ollie oxen free, you are deceived, because the Bible doesn't say that. And
Okay.
this is serious, deep stuff.
Oh, it is. And let me okay, before I argue with you, I agree with you. But help me in my expression.
Yeah.
You know, for me, James says faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
It should be no surprise to anybody that if you have the Holy Spirit of Yahweh in you and the Torah or the law of God is being written on your heart, it will manifest in your life. You will do it. You will do
Mhm.
it. So it's not that it is you are now working for righteousness in a your working sense. It's just that if you are indeed saved, if you have been, if you have a real encounter with the Passover lamb and you have the Spirit of God, you are going to do good works. You
Yeah.
are going to walk in that.
Yeah.
Now, what's confusing to me, if I were to just, lay it out there, is every one of these people in the desert, were they saved or not saved? They came out of Egypt by the blood of a Passover
Yeah.
lamb.
This is the triple status of salvation. You have been delivered. Okay. Maybe the word is you have been rescued. You are being sanctified, and you will be delivered into the promised land. Salvation must work its completeness. You don't get to just say you're saved, believe you're saved, and then not live like one who has been saved, because your works demonstrate you're not saved. Your works demonstrate that you are still a slave to sin. And that's exactly, going back to John, what Yeshua's point is to the Pharisees. They are children of Abraham. They are legally entitled to the promises that Yahweh made to Abraham. No question there. But he says to them, you are a slave to sin. And the slave doesn't remain in the house. You have a debt that has to be paid off. The wages of sin is death. You can't earn your way out of sin, children of Abraham. Paul says it's the free gift of God. The slave does not remain in the house forever. So a Hebrew slave, yeah, they can be released after 7 years, but that doesn't mean they're going to stay. They're not going to stay in the house. They're gone. Okay. The son remains forever. So they are going to be set free. If the son sets you free, you are free indeed. I know you're offspring of Abraham, but you are children of your father, the devil. Why? Because you've sold yourselves into sin. And so you now have a debt and are stuck in the household of the devil. And he's telling him, I'm the only one that can redeem you. I'm the only one that can purchase you back. And he's going to do it according to the Torah, and it just goes over their head. They don't get it at all. But this is why he had to be made like his brothers in every way. A brother can redeem. So he yokes himself to humanity, going all the way back to Abraham. And they do that covenant ceremony where they pass through the pieces. That covenant ceremony was, may you or I become like this if we do not keep our end of the bargain.
What covenant are we talking about here?
This is Genesis 15.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so right. I see the cutting part. May we become like that, cut you apart. You're going to die, but only Yahweh passes through those two halves. So it's a unilateral covenant.
And so what happens to the pieces? How are the pieces originated? They're split in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
open.
Yeah.
How is Yeshua displayed on the cross?
Open.
His arms open.
Mm-hmm.
He fulfills his covenant promise to Abraham, saying, if we don't, if anybody breaks this, because he says, you, Abraham, you need to keep this covenant because you're going to teach your kids to keep this. But even if your kids break it, I'm the one that walks through the pieces. So what does Yeshua do? He becomes like his brothers and he bears the punishment of all Israel. He fulfills the covenant oath.
Okay. I
and
get
takes
that
the
part.
punishment upon himself.
Jacob, I know that everyone's going to have this brain hiccup. How is what you're saying different from works righteousness?
Because you still have to be delivered and you can't pay the delivery price. No matter how hard you work, you cannot set yourself free from sin.
Okay, that's fine. Then how does my lack of abidance in the Torah keep me out of the promised land?
Because God says it does.
Okay, well, that's fine. But now is this is this works righteousness now?
It's works and righteousness coming together, just like James says. And since James was taught by Yeshua and he's considered an apostle in the early church, you're really going to argue, not you, obviously, but I mean, you're really going to argue with James?
Well, no, I'm not. And
I know you're not.
There's a sense in which, this doesn't, the mind hiccup here is not that I am going to be excluded from the promised land, because I am saved and I seek by the Spirit to abide in that Torah. It's my dad's instruction. I got nothing else better to do. This is what I'm about. You can't stop me from doing it. This is what I am going to do. What happens to those people who say, well, I don't agree with you, Jacob, that the Torah is the rubric for instruction. I seek to obey. I seek to follow the Father's instruction, but it's not the same instruction that you say it is, Jacob.
Yeah. You're a child of your father, the devil.
Oh gosh.
That's what Yeshua says, guys, gals. I mean, it's going to sound so cold, but it's what Yeshua said. So could we I can't believe Jacob said that. Please grow up. Like this is the growing into maturation. And this is, if you look at what happened, the Psalm 95 is a reference to the event at Kadesh Barnea. And they refused to go in, even though God told them to do it. And then what do they attempt to do? Oh, no, we'll go. And they try to do it on their own terms, and they're slaughtered. And they flee, and they don't enter the promised land on their own strength, on their own terms. You don't get to enter if you're disobedient. So they fall in the wilderness. The only two that are able to go in were Joshua and Caleb. That was it.
Here's the thing is, as you say all this, I'm the gatekeeper to what we do here on Everyday Torah, and I'm publishing this. This is right. What you're saying is right. I can't say it's comfortable.
No, it's not comfortable,
but it's right. And I can imagine those guys listening to Yeshua in John 8. It wasn't entirely comfortable for them either.
Nope. They wanted to kill Yeshua. I get it. There's going to be people that are going to be raging mad watching this, gnashing their teeth. That's fine. Your fathers killed Yeshua. It makes no surprise to me that you want to kill somebody like me because you're children of your father, the devil. This doesn't shock me more. This was the Band-Aid rip that came when I lost my family. Your fathers did the same thing to the prophets. Your fathers despise the instruction of Yah in the wilderness. It does not shock me for 1 second that you hate me and don't want to have anything to do with me. This is not a shock to my system anymore because I've lived it for 2 years. I have counted it all as loss because I race according to the rules. And I know that I only make it in the promised land if I run according to the rules, knowing full and well that I was redeemed. And this is what we're going to build to now.
Okay.
That we're redeemed and he pays a price we could never pay. But how is this possible? Because of Leviticus 25. You may pick up slaves from the foreigner amongst you, and you may bequeath them to your son as an inheritance. But what does the son do, Trevor, with foreigners who are not children of Abraham? He says, if the son sets you free, you are free indeed. And who is the son going to set free in his household? The good and faithful servant. He's not going to release a wicked servant. He's going to cast that servant outside where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is exactly what the parable of the talents says. You wicked, slothful servant, you knew that I was harsh, reaping where I did not sow. Take him and bind him and throwing him out into where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And that talent, give it to the one who has 10. And those two faithful servants enter into the joy of their master. The wicked, slothful servant doesn't. Oh, I'm a slave, but I'm in the house. Okay, here you go. Really? The slave doesn't remain forever. The son does. And if the son sets you free, you are free indeed. That's how the Gentiles become grafted in. They're foreigners to the covenants of promise. And this is what we build to in Ephesians. This is really where I want to now be at as a way of the wanderer, is I want to be in Ephesians. So let's go to Ephesians chapter 2, 18 to 22. And this is going to move in the direction I want to go.
Yeah, so get us there, and we've got about 5 minutes to get us there before we go off and pick up next time.
Yep.
Where am I going right now? Ephesians what?
Ephesians 2:18.
Ephesians 2. Got it. All right.
For through him we both have access to one spirit, or in one spirit, to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, foreigners, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So what's going on? We're going to work through Ephesians now. The premise is the Son has set you free. You're no longer a slave to sin. He's paid the price to set you free. And now, because you are set free, you now have the right to be adopted, because you've been set free from the other house. He purchases you from the household of Satan. You're brought into the Father's house. The Son is faithful over the whole house, and the Son sets you free. You are free indeed. To the ones who believe in him, John says in chapter 1, he gave the right to be called the children of God. The Son sets the slaves free, and the Father adopts.
Yeah, this is Romans 8.
And because of the adoption, are you going to act like you did in the devil's house?
No.
No. Why? Because you have to then be proven faithful as a potential adoption candidate.
Yeah, I literally just went over this in Roman law. It talks about that, and this happens around 14. And
Yep, in
making
Romans,
all these illusions.
Yep.
I get it.
Yep. So what does it say all creation is groaning and waiting for? The revealing of the sons of God, the adoption. So all of creation is waiting with bated breath. Who are going to be the children that become sons over or in the household of God, whom then the Son has the authority, saying in Hebrews, here am I and the children you have given me. The son shares with his brothers. That's why it says he's the firstborn amongst many brethren.
Mm-hmm.
We are all, men and women, waiting for the adoption. This is our glorification when we have been proven to be faithful in this life. At the end, when Yeshua comes, because of our faithfulness to the one who conquers in Revelation 2 and 3, I will give the right to sit on my throne, just as my Father gave me the right to sit on his throne. If the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. This is the way of the wanderer. You can be a complete foreigner to the covenants of promise to the children of Abraham. But because the Torah is written the way it is, Yeshua has the lawful right as he passes through the nations, as they become his inheritance. He can decide to purchase slaves that are for sale, and they are for sale. But the wages of the redemption is death. And so he, according to the writer of Hebrews, tastes death for all in one atoning sacrifice, so that the ability to purchase is there. This is why it is written, you purchased men from all nations. He's purchasing because the Torah gives him the legal right to, because Yahweh's Torah is abiding. The Father's law covers everything. Satan doing what he does never nullifies the law. Yahweh's Torah is still imminent. So the Son can pass through the nations. Oh, there's a slave for auction. Do you want to be purchased? Yes, Master. I believe you can save me. Save me from this body of death. It's the free gift of God. Come into my house, to my Father's house, where there are many rooms. And then what happens is you remain a faithful servant after you've been purchased. This is the wilderness test. Yes, Israel was purchased, but not all Israel is Israel. And so the foreigner can find themselves in the house of God, and the child of Abraham can find themselves an outcast. This is how it's all possible because of Leviticus 25. And if you don't know your Torah, you don't understand that there's actually a legal requirement that is mandated by the Father for the redemption of slaves. There's a lawful requirement that Yeshua fulfills, the righteous requirement of the law. I mean, what that means is so much bigger than him living a sinless life. He plays the entire game, so to speak, by the rules and finishes the race according to the rules, and he wins and he gets the crown. So Yeshua being sinless is he brings us into the Torah narrative. Whether or not anybody realizes it, you are a part of the Torah narrative. And the righteous requirement of the law must be fulfilled, but you get to be brought into the household of God. He pays the purchase price. It can't overemphasize this enough. It is the free gift of God to be purchased. If you believe he can purchase you, you will be purchased. You come into the house as a slave. The Son will set you free if you prove to be a faithful slave. And then when he sets you free, then the Father can adopt you. And at that adoption, we are glorified. And we become like the Son, not in our divinity, but we're glorified and become sons of God in the house with the right to rule over the nations during the millennial kingdom.
Okay, are you at a stopping point?
I am.
Okay, let me reflect just for a sec, and then we'll let us go here. The reflection is this: if you only knew what was going on in my mind, because I just had the benefit of the previous hour before we even got onto the podcast, which we'll get to, and then going through how Yahweh yearly reminds us that after Passover, the first day of unleavened bread, we go through a whole week of unleavened bread every year on purpose to remind us that we are to rid of our former enslavement, and instead we are to be baptized into a new world, we have a new king. I can even use Paul's words. I'm enslaved. I'm chained to a brand new rubric.
And the way of the wanderer is that those 7 days of unleavened bread correspond to 7,000 years.
Oh my! My watch goes off. I can't do this.
Same thing with Sukkot. 7 days for 7,000 years. Temporary dwellings until the story comes to the close and everybody that shall belong to the Lord our God is redeemed and goes with him into eternity.
Well, hey everyone. Good morning. I hope that that was edifying to you. Hey, Jacob and I are not above reproof. So if you see something that was said wrong there or inaccurate in your mind, don't just come on to say, in the comment section below, just I can't listen to that. No temper tantrums. But if you want to show us with scripture, a good line of logic that we can follow that would temper some of the things that were said there, well, fine. At the same time, here I am listening, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't say there's anything I disagree with there. And I live in a culture that likes to, and you know me too. I tend to be, I'm not a politically correct person, but I would say that I do work hard to try to find ways where I can put a little sugar with with what we're saying, so that way. But sometimes, that's not the way Yeshua did it. Apparently, there in John 8. I mean, he went right. And that's the thing about truth. It's just truth, and it cuts sometimes. It does cut, and I recognize that. Hence, we're publishing this. Hey. Come back for next time. Our Messiah, I can't even say it any better than what Jacob just did over the last hour. Walked in that Torah. This makes that statement so much more robust. Walked in that Torah every day of his life. And if we want to be like our Father, who redeemed us, purchased us, and we claim that we want to be like Messiah Yeshua, we need to, by the power of the Spirit, walk in that Torah every day of our lives. That's why we call it Everyday Torah. See you next time.